Welcome to Military Analytics. Ukraine has shifted its offensive operations towards Crimea and the surrounding areas, disrupting the Russian army's order through long-range missile and UAV attacks. The Crimea, Mariupol, Melitopol, Berdyansk, and Donbass regions have all experienced Ukrainian airstrikes, while border cities like Bryansk, Belgorod, Rostov, and Krasnodar remain vulnerable to Ukraine's air assaults. These attacks serve one purpose: to restore the freedom of Ukrainians. Moscow is alarmed by Ukraine's aerial onslaught on Crimea and the Russian border cities, intensifying the unease within the Russian army. Recent weeks have witnessed multiple drone attacks, including strikes on Sevastopol, the largest city in Crimea. Additionally, a sabotage act resulted in a train derailment and the suspension of rail traffic between Sevastopol and Simferopol, the capital of Crimea. The detonation of the Simferopol train line, the drone attack on a Russian warship in the Black Sea, and the destruction of Russian supply lines and oil depots near the Kerch Bridge have pushed Putin's boundaries and cornered Russia. Russian residents in Crimea live in fear and panic, while the authorities are overwhelmed by serious concern. Sergei Aksyonov, the Kremlin-backed leader of Crimea, may be worried about the region's defense capabilities, according to the UK Ministry of Defense. Ukrainian drone swarms dominate the Crimean skies, causing mass evacuations, panic, and anxiety among the Russian side. Just recently, the Ukrainian armed forces launched a midnight drone attack on the Crimean Peninsula. 7 Ukrainian drones targeted various Russian facilities across Crimea, with attacks near Zonkva and the Mahmud train station. The Ukrainian armed forces likely aimed to disrupt the Russian logistics network in the north of Crimea by targeting the Kherson region. Moreover, an airstrike hit the Russian railway line and military depots near Maslova, close to the Zonkui-Kherson highway and Komsomolskoye settlement. The village of Zavetnoye, southwest of Simferopol, witnessed the destruction of a drone, possibly targeting a water pumping station. 2 other drones were aimed at the naval base of Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, but the Russian military claims to have shot them down. Although the Crimean Peninsula holds strategic importance in the Black Sea, hosting 2.5 million people, the majority being Russian citizens, approximately 1 million Russians settled in the region illegally after the annexation of Crimea. Russian military installations, airports, train tracks, logistics centers, fuel depots, and the Navy base in Crimea have faced numerous attacks since August, leading to an increased troop presence and evacuations of soldiers' families in certain areas. The atmosphere of fear and panic has forced Russians on the peninsula to sell their homes and flee, often resulting in long queues of refugees crossing the Kerch Bridge and overcrowded train and ferry services. The Ukrainian attacks have successfully prompted approximately 150,000 Russian citizens to flee Crimea so far. Ukrainian officials responsible for the Crimea region acknowledge this but assert that it is insufficient since the main aim of Ukraine is to liberate Crimea and diminish Russian presence there. The recent offensive operations conducted by the Ukrainian army to liberate Crimea take Ukraine closer to achieving this goal. The explosions that occurred in the Crimean capital severely impacted Vladimir Putin's supply lines and disrupted Russia's logistics connections with Crimea. A report from the UK Ministry of Defense, based on intelligence data, highlights how the explosion on the railroad tracks disrupted the delivery of supplies and weapons to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, including Kalibr cruise missiles. Any acts of sabotage in this critical area raise concerns about the Kremlin's ability to protect other vital infrastructure in Crimea. Putin's annexation of Crimea in 2014 aimed to maintain control over occupied territories in southern and eastern Ukraine and secure the supply of Russian troops. Satellite images reveal extensive coastal defenses, such as Dragon's Teeth, trenches, and bunkers, which have transformed Crimea into a military defensive line. The Dragon Teeth structures, resembling pyramids along the coastline, prohibit tanks and military vehicles from passing through. Trenches provide additional defense behind the Dragon's Teeth, and bunkers serve as defensive positions. Ongoing construction work, including the presence of Dragon Teeth, trenches, evacuation equipment, and piles of trees near the Crimean coastline, suggests Russia's continuous efforts to fortify the region. Military analysts suggest that these defensive measures aim to deter Ukraine from launching a naval attack on Crimea, as Russia anticipates such ambitions. However, the Ukrainian army is training to overcome these obstacles, as evidenced by exercises crushing the Dragon's teeth with British Challenger 2 tanks. In summary, the Ukrainian armed forces have targeted the Russian spy ship Ivan Kurs in their mission to liberate Crimea, as predicted. They have also carried out sabotage actions on the peninsula's railway lines and conducted attacks along the sides of the Sea of Azov. While the Black Sea was an important gate for the Russian Navy and trade, it suddenly became an attack ramp with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russian submarines and missile ships were used to bombard Ukrainian cities. The Russian Federation currently maintains 2 missile carriers and a total of 8 caliber cruise missiles in the Black Sea. The Russian army has doubled the number of missile carriers deployed in the Black Sea. Ukraine's Southern Operational Command reported 8 caliber equipped missile carriers and 2 submarines are currently on combat duty. In addition, the Ukrainian Southern Command warned the people of the region that warnings of airstrikes should be taken seriously, given the available intelligence about the strengthening of reconnaissance activities by Russian drones and the readiness of Russian bombers to take official. As of last week, Russia was holding 4 caliber and a single missile carrier off the coast of occupied Crimea. The doubling of this number is an indication that the Russian Navy is regrouping in the Black Sea. In addition to submarines in the Black Sea are doing their assigned naval duties in fear. Russian submarines, especially seen in the port of Odessa, are constantly coming to the area, probably for reconnaissance missions, come to the surface, and do not appear for a long time again. Ukrainian military officials believe that the Russian submarines were probably on a reconnaissance mission and fled to the Black Sea immediately after the mission to avoid being hit by Ukrainian waves. So what is the current state of the Russian submarine fleet? Russia has recently begun to expand its submarine fleet. The Russian shipbuilding company Admiralty Shipyards, a subsidiary of United Shipbuilding Corporation, has launched the 5th Project 363.3 submarine Moskva for the Russian Navy. Submarines of the modified 636 project have a higher combat effectiveness compared to previous projects. The ships have the optimum combination of acoustic stealth and target acquisition range, the latest inertial navigation system, a modern automated information and control system, and a powerful high-speed torpedo missile armament. Mozaisk is the 5th of the 363.3 class submarines in the Russian Navy. The 4th submarine of its class, Ufa, entered service in November last year. Admiralty Shipyards signed a contract for 6 Project 636.3 submarines for the Pacific Fleet in September 2016. The diesel-electric submarine Magadan, the 5th ship of the class, entered service last October. JSC Admiralty Shipyards continued the construction of the 6th submarine Yakutsk. The submarines were lowered in pairs with the participation of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia shows its submarine presence in almost every sea it can reach. There are constant reports of Russian submarine activities in the Black Sea, Baltic, North Sea, Pacific, and Atlantic. This poses a general Russian threat to the United States and its partners. So what kind of threats does this pose in the future? The head of the U.S. Northern Command recently told senators that Russia's most powerful Yasen-class attack submarines could be on permanent patrol on any of the U.S. coasts within 2 years. Broad consensus in the West has proven that the war in Ukraine has emptied, under-equipped, and mismanaged the once feared Russian armed forces. Accompanying the mediocre performance of the Russian Air Force, the Russian Army broke records with the loss of its soldiers and main battle tanks. The sinking of the Russian flagship Moskva in the Black Sea and the poor performance of the Russian Navy in the Black Sea seem to point to a much reduced threat across the full spectrum of non-nuclear capabilities. The Russian surface fleet is predominantly obsolete, with a few modern fighters the size of frigates. In addition, submarine forces pose a potentially much more serious challenge because the actual analysis doesn't just involve counting platform numbers. It involves a much more complex assessment of readiness, material condition, weapon capacity, crew training, and proficiency. The exact extent of this threat is difficult to measure. Some may argue that it's in the interest of Western navies and industrial suppliers to exaggerate the threat by senior uniformed personnel. What can be said with certainty is that Russian submarine activity increased significantly in the decade preceding the Ukrainian war. So why are submarines so important for Russian approval? The number of boats available to the Russian Navy doesn't even come close to the golden age of the Soviet Union. Therefore, lacking numerical advantage, the Russians now have no choice but to strive for qualitative equality. This has been tried with some success through weapon and sensor development, with a great effort to match the noise reduction capabilities of Western designs. At the end of the Cold War, the advent of Silent Victor III class SSNs finally began to challenge NATO's assumption that they could outcompete the noises. Soviet boats with the aid of the underwater fixed sonar arrays of the Sound Surveillance Network, it was often possible to determine approximate Russian submarine arrangements, even if other marine assets had to be localized and shadowed. Thanks to a US-based spy gang, Russian designers got an idea of the acoustic hygiene measures that had been painstakingly and extensively developed over the decades by the USN, and were able to quickly implement them into their designs. The new Yasen-class submarines based on the Akula class build on this knowledge. Although it was developed and delivered painstakingly and slowly, it can now exert tactical and even strategic effect. In 2018, Severodvinsk began an expedition in the North Atlantic and for several weeks survived the US and significant efforts to find it, especially in the open ocean. The presence of a single SSN can have a powerful effect, even against a large number of competitors threatening a large area. In addition, the Kilo and Lada class conventional submarines owned by the Russian fleet should not be underestimated. These submarines are shorter-range submarines operating in the Barents Sea and the Baltic and are well-suited for coastal missions. For Sevastopol-based submarines have launched cruise missile attacks on Ukraine and will be by far the biggest threat to any NATO warship that may sail into the Black Sea. Russian submarines also conducted operations from the Tartus bases in Syria and maintained an almost permanent presence in the eastern Mediterranean. Trying to shadow Russian submarines will require a great deal of effort from NATO naval forces in the region. HMS Audacious recently returned from an epic deployment in the eastern Mediterranean and was 363 days away from Faslan. A Russian nuclear submarine in the Mediterranean has further increased tensions as the Russian Navy has assigned this area high priority. In September 2022, the Italian Navy claimed to have detected Severodvinsk off Sicily, and DECIN observations suggest that it was correct. If NATO forces were able to detect and track Severodvinsk at least in part of its deployment, it indicates that the anti-submarine capabilities are generally keeping up with the threat. Notorious Russian maintenance practices may have also contributed to its detection, as their boats are known to become significantly noisier over time than when they were first built. So what makes the Arsen-class submarines so valuable? Project 85 Yasen-class ran aground in Severodvinsk 1993, but against the background of post-Soviet decay, it took more than 20 years before it was ready for deployment in operations. When the second submarine, the Kazan, was launched, the Russian military was receiving new investment, and advances in technology led to significant design changes. Kazan's subsequent submarines in the class were designated Project 85M and took about 10 years to build. These are large submarines weighing about 13,000 tons underwater, but the Kazan is slightly smaller and about 9 meters shorter than its brethren. The inclusion of vertical launch cells in attack submarine designs is a worldwide trend. A feature of the latest USN Virginia-class blocks the future SSN AUKUS, and the Chinese Type 093 Shan-class variant Yasens have 8 modules each with space for the Caliber missile or the Onyx anti-ship missile. The Caliber variant was adapted to carry tactical nuclear warheads, and some Russian sources claimed it had a range of 4,000 kilometers. Although the massive use of cruise missiles against targets in Ukraine has probably severely depleted Russian Caliber stockpiles, and even if the attacks stopped now, it will take many years to replace them. So what you think about the subject? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.